The station's containment siren didn't just ring. It shattered the very air of Aegis Prime. It was a sound reserved for only one scenario, an Apex-class containment breach, the kind of emergency that usually meant a rogue asteroid or a biological weapon. But today, the galaxy's most terrifying predators hadn't broken into the station. Their offspring had gone missing inside it. If you love stories where humans prove exactly why we're the wildest, most unpredictable species in the galaxy, hit that subscribe button right now before the lockdown doors seal shut. To understand the sheer panic gripping the command deck, you need to understand the Kaelen. They aren't just apex predators, they are evolutionary nightmares. Picture 8 feet of bio-armored muscle, retractable claws capable of shearing through starship hull plating, and a temperament that makes a starved tiger look like a house cat. They are a species so violently lethal that their diplomatic delegations are escorted by heavily armed dreadnoughts. And right now, the Kaelen Matriarch was standing on the bridge of Aegis Prime, letting out a low, guttural snarl that was vibrating the teeth right out of Commander Zarn's reptilian skull. 3 of her cubs were missing. Now, Kaelen cubs aren't helpless little babies. Even at 4 weeks old, they're the size of a bowling ball and armed with neurotoxic venom and razor-sharp teeth. They are born hunters, but to the matriarch they were her entire world, and someone or something on the station had taken them. Find them, the matriarch hissed, her translator barely keeping up with the raw fury in her vocal cords. Or, I will paint this station with the blood of your crew. Commander Zarn frantically swiped his multi-limbed hands across the holographic security consoles. Sweat pooled beneath his scales. The station was vast, housing over 80 different species. If one of the carnivorous avian races had snatched the cubs, there would be an interstellar war by dinner time. He initiated a full-spectrum thermal scan. Red emergency lights bathed the command deck in a sinister glow. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic, heavy breathing of the massive predator standing behind him. Scanning sectors 1 through 4, Zarn stammered, his voice trembling. Nothing. Sectors 5 and 6 clear. Then, the console let out a sharp, piercing ping. A biosignature anomaly had just registered. It wasn't in the hydroponics bay. It wasn't in the engineering core. It was in Sector 7. Zarn's blood ran cold. He stopped breathing entirely. Sector 7 was the human habitation zone. Humans, the galaxy's newest, weirdest, and most inexplicably suicidal species. They were soft, lacked natural armor, had no venom, and yet possessed a terrifying psychological quirk that terrified the rest of the galactic community. They tried to pack bond with absolutely everything. Show me, the matriarch demanded, her heavy footsteps cracking the reinforced floor grates as she stepped closer to the screen. Zarn swallowed hard, his trembling fingers pulling up the security feed from Corridor 7B. The camera flickered to life. The corridor was empty, save for a single human. It was a maintenance worker. He was leaning on a mop, wearing a pair of faded blue denim pants and a massive, oversized gray garment humans referred to as a hoodie. The human, identified as Technician Third Class Jake, was humming a tune to himself, completely oblivious to the station-wide lockdown sirens blaring around him. His audio receptors were plugged with small white wires. But that wasn't what made Zarn's heart completely stop. It was the human's hoodie. The front pocket of the thick gray fabric was bulging massively. It was stretched tight, heavy, and weighed down. And as the camera zoomed in, Zarn saw it. The fabric was wriggling. Several somethings, were moving violently inside the dark sanctuary of the human's pocket. Before Zarn could even attempt to lock down the bulkheads and isolate the human from the rest of the station, the matriarch let out a deafening roar. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for security. She spun on her massive heels, her bio-armor expanding, and lunged toward the blast doors, moving with a terrifying speed straight toward Sector 7. Zarn stared at the screen in absolute horror. The universe's most lethal mother was charging at full speed toward a blissfully unaware human janitor. And, on the screen, Technician Jake suddenly looked down at his bulging pocket, smiled softly, and patted it. The blast doors of Sector 7 were rated to withstand a direct hit from a plasma torpedo. The Kaelen Matriarch went through them like wet tissue paper. Alarms were no longer just blaring, they were shrieking. Red strobes painted the metallic walls in jagged, disorienting flashes of pure panic. On the command deck, Commander Zarn watched the monitors with all four of his stomachs tied in agonizing knots. He was witnessing a diplomatic disaster in real time. He was witnessing a brutal execution. Divert security teams. Zarn yelled, his mandibles clicking wildly. Get a containment squad down there right now. Sir, his tactical officer stammered, feathers puffing up in pure terror. If we send armed guards, she'll think it's an ambush. She'll slaughter everyone. Zarn knew the tactical officer was right. The matriarch was acting on pure, unfiltered maternal instinct. In Kaelen culture, any creature found near a missing cub was considered prey. There were no trials. There were no questions. There was only teeth and claws and blood. And at the end of Corridor 7B stood the prey, Technician 3rd Class Jake. Through the high-definition security feed, Zarn watched the oblivious human. Jake had finally stopped mopping. He leaned the long synthetic stick against the bulkhead, totally deaf to the absolute chaos echoing just 3 sectors away. The little white wires were still jammed firmly in his ears. Then Jake did something that made Zarn gasp out loud. The human reached deep into that bulging, heavy hoodie pocket. He didn't pull his hand back in pain. There was no screaming. Instead, Jake rummaged around inside the makeshift fabric cave, his face contorting into a look of severe concentration. He's trying to weaponize them, the tactical officer whispered in absolute horror. The human knows he's trapped. It made a terrifying kind of sense to the alien crew. Humans were notorious across the galaxy for their desperate survival tactics. If the human realized he was cornered, using the highly venomous cubs as a biological deterrent was exactly the kind of insane scorched earth strategy their species was famous for. But Jake didn't pull out a cub. He pulled out a small, metallic, crinkling square, a human food ration wrapper. Jake tore the top off with his teeth. He peered down into the darkness of his pocket. Hey! The human's voice suddenly crackled over the security feed's audio monitors, sounding startlingly calm. I told you you have to share. No, biting your brother. Zarn's jaw dropped so hard it nearly unhinged. Did the human just give a disciplinary order to an Apex-class infant? He's completely insane. Zarn breathed, his scales losing their color. He is entirely devoid of basic survival instincts. A heavy thud shook the camera feed. Then another. The matriarch was only 1 corridor away. The heavy metallic screech of her claws tearing around the corner echoed through the comms. She was a runaway freight train of bio-armor and rage, leaving deep gouges in the reinforced floor plating with every single step. Jake casually tossed the empty wrapper into a nearby incinerator chute. He patted the bulging pocket again. The fabric lunged and stretched as something inside fought fiercely. A sharp, high-pitched chirp, the unmistakable sound of a highly distressed Kaelen cub, rang out. The sound acted like a homing beacon. The reinforced bulkhead door at the end of Jake's corridor suddenly buckled inward with a deafening crash. A massive, clawed hand ripped through the solid steel. The metal groaned, screeching in protest, before the entire door was violently ripped from its hinges and tossed aside like a discarded toy. The matriarch stood in the threshold. She was magnificent and terrifying. 8 feet of rippling, armored muscle, her mandibles flared wide, dripping with acidic saliva that hissed and burned as it hit the floor. Her obsidian eyes locked instantly onto the small, squishy, armorless biped standing 20 feet away. Jake finally noticed. He slowly pulled one of the white wires out of his ear. The matriarch let out a roar that shattered 2 overhead light fixtures, showering the corridor in sparks. She dropped onto all fours, her muscles tensing for the lethal pounce. She was going to tear this human to absolute shreds. But before she could launch herself forward, Jake's hoodie pocket violently ripped open at the seam. A tiny scale head popped out. It was one of the cubs. But as Zarn zoomed the camera in on the feed, the blood completely drained from his face. The cub's mouth, jaw, and sharp little teeth were covered entirely in a thick, sticky, dark red substance. By the ancestors. Zarn choked out, clutching his command chair. The human didn't steal them. He's feeding them the station crew. The matriarch froze, her eyes locked on the red-stained mouth of her baby. And then, the most unpredictable thing in the galaxy happened. Jake looked at the giant, murderous alien, then looked down at the tiny blood-red cub in his pocket, and let out an exasperated sigh. Great, Jake muttered. Now your mom is here. And you guys made a mess. On the command deck of Aegis Prime, 84 alien species stopped breathing at the exact same time. The matriarch's roar had silenced the blaring lockdown sirens, leaving behind only the deadly, suffocating quiet of an impending execution. She towered over Technician Third Class Jake, her massive spiked shadow swallowing him whole. Thick strands of acidic drool sizzled and popped against the deck plates, landing just inches from Jake's beat-up, steel-toed work boots. If you want to see how this absolutely insane human survives the galaxy's deadliest mother, hit that subscribe button right now, before the tension breaks. Any other species in the galaxy would have fainted. Any other creature would have dropped to its knees, pressed its face to the floor, and begged the stars for a quick, painless death. Jake just looked profoundly annoyed. Look, the human said, pointing a scuffed finger directly at the 8-foot-tall, bio-armored killing machine. I didn't kidnap them. They snuck into my cleaning cart back in sector for while I was fixing a broken conduit. I've been trying to find a security patrol for 20 minutes, but nobody was at their posts. Jake crossed his arms, the bulging pocket of his hoodie squirming wildly. You guys really need better emergency protocols. On the command monitors, Commander Zarn's translator beeped, converting Jake's casual, mildly irritated complaints into the Galactic standard. The bridge crew was stunned into absolute paralysis. Did the squishy, unarmored human just critique station security while staring directly down the throat of an apex matriarch? But the matriarch wasn't listening to the human's words. Her terrifying obsidian eyes were fixated entirely on the little cub poking its head out of the ripped gray fabric. The cub let out a happy, vibrating trill. It rubbed its face against Jake's chest, smearing the thick, sticky, dark red substance all over the human's shirt. Zarn covered his secondary eyes. He didn't want to watch the human be disemboweled. The matriarch leaned down, her massive, razor-lined jaws opening wide. She sniffed the red stain on her cub's face. Her slit-like nostrils flared violently. She was analyzing the blood. She was trying to identify which of the station's crew this insane human had slaughtered to feed her highly venomous young. She took a deep, rattling breath and completely froze. Her heavy bio-armor plates clicked as she pulled her massive head back in sheer, unadulterated confusion. That wasn't the metallic, iron-heavy tang of avian blood. It wasn't the bitter copper scent of reptilian plasma. It smelled sweet, sickeningly, powerfully sweet. Yeah, sorry about the mess, Jake muttered. He reached deep into his torn pocket and casually pulled out the other two cubs. He held them by the scruffs of their necks, dangling them in the air like naughty kittens. I tried to give them the standard synthetic protein rations from the cafeteria. They hated it, spit it right in my face. Jake casually wiped a smear of the thick red substance off his own cheek. He looked at his thumb, shrugged, and licked it clean. The tactical officer on the bridge gagged, nearly vomiting onto his console. By the stars, he's drinking the blood. No, wait, Zarn whispered, leaning closer to the high-resolution tactical monitor. The station's thermal and chemical sensors were rapidly picking up the composition of the red paste smeared across the human and the cubs. The readout on Zarn's screen flashed bright green. Non-toxic, non-biological, extreme glucose concentration. It's a complex carbohydrate paste, Zarn said, his voice cracking with absolute disbelief. It's artificial fruit. So, Jake continued, setting the three heavily armed, highly venomous cubs gently onto the floor at the matriarch's massive clawed feet. I gave them some of my personal stash from Earth. Strawberry fruit snacks. The gummy kind with the liquid centers. Turns out they absolutely love them. The three cubs didn't run to hide behind their terrifying mother. Instead, they immediately swarmed Jake's boots. They were chirping wildly, biting at his shoelaces, demanding more. They were literally vibrating. Their scaled tails were whipping back and forth at Mach speed, striking the metal floor like tiny drumsticks. They weren't traumatized. They were on a massive, unprecedented, completely uncontrolled sugar high. The matriarch stared down at her bouncing, hyperactive offspring. She slowly looked back up at the human. Then, she lowered her massive, terrifying head straight down to Jake's eye level. The tension in the corridor instantly snapped back to lethal levels. She opened her jaws. Her hot breath ruffled Jake's messy hair. She extended a long, bifurcated tongue and slowly swiped it across the red gummy stain on Jake's hoodie, tasting the synthetic strawberry residue for herself. Zarn held his breath. One wrong move, and the matriarch would bite the human in half simply for the profound insult of feeding her apex predator cubs processed junk food. The matriarch closed her eyes. Her massive, armored body shuddered violently, and then she opened her eyes, locked her terrifying, unblinking gaze entirely onto Jake, and did something no Kaelen had ever done in the history of the Galactic Alliance. A sound echoed through Corridor 7B that had never been recorded in the entire documented history of the Galactic Alliance. It started deep within the Kaelen Matriarch's massive chest, a low, rumbling vibration that shook the loose dust from the ceiling panels and rattled Jake's teeth in his skull. It wasn't a growl of warning. It wasn't a battle cry. It was a purr, a deep, engine-like, earth-shattering purr of absolute, sugary bliss. If you are loving this absolute HFY absurdity where humanity conquers the cosmos with junk food, smash that subscribe button right now before the automated lasers lock on. On the command deck, Commander Zarn gripped his console so hard his claws cracked. His jaw was hanging wide open. The tactical officer beside him had actually fainted, slumping over his monitors in a heap of ruffled feathers. The matriarch, the galaxy's most feared killing machine, a creature known to systematically dismantle dreadnoughts when irritated, was sitting on her haunches. She lowered her massive, heavily armored head, exposing the soft, unplated flesh of her throat directly to the squishy human janitor. She's yielding, Zarn whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and sheer terror. She is submitting to a maintenance technician third class. In Kaelen culture, exposing the throat was the ultimate sign of absolute loyalty and submission. It meant the matriarch acknowledged Jake not as prey, but as a superior alpha. He had provided highly coveted, extremely potent nourishment to her offspring. He was now, by the violent laws of her species, an honorary member of her bloodline. Jake, however, was blissfully unaware of the interstellar diplomatic miracle he had just achieved. He just looked at the giant, purring alien, looked down at his ripped hoodie and sighed. "Okay, big girl," Jake said, his tone resembling a man talking to a very large, slightly annoying stray dog. "I get it. You want the good stuff too." Zarn watched through his fingers as Jake casually reached into the other pocket of his denim pants. The human pulled out an intact, shiny plastic wrapper. He ripped it open, extracted a glowing red gummy square, and held it up in his palm. The matriarch's massive, slit-like pupils dilated until her eyes were nearly pitch black. She leaned forward and, with terrifying delicacy, used her bifurcated tongue to gently lift the tiny strawberry fruit snack from Jake's unarmored hand. She closed her eyes. Her armored plating shivered. The concentrated burst of liquid, artificial sugar hit her system like a targeted kinetic strike. When she opened her eyes again, she didn't just purr. She let out a soft, chittering chirp, nuzzling her massive, spiked snout gently against Jake's shoulder, nearly knocking him off balance. The human had completely pacified the apex predator. He had pack-bonded with a nightmare. Commander Zarn finally let out the breath he had been holding for the last 10 minutes. By the ancestors, cancel the lockdown. Stand down all security protocols. The crisis is Beep, beep, beep. A new, infinitely more terrifying alarm suddenly overrode the command deck speakers. It wasn't the biological containment siren. It was the automated station defense grid. Zarin's blood froze all over again. What is that? I gave the order to stand down. Sir, the resurrected tactical officer gasped, frantically tapping his screens. It's not us. When the matriarch ripped the blast door off its hinges, she triggered the Sector 7 catastrophic breach protocols. The automated defense matrix is acting on its own. Back in Corridor 7B, the gentle, absurd moment of cross-species bonding was violently interrupted. The ceiling panels above Jake and the Kaelen family suddenly slid open. 6 heavy-duty, twin-linked plasma auto turrets descended from the ceiling. They whirred mechanically, their targeting sensors glowing a lethal, bright crimson. A synthetic voice echoed through the hallway. Hostile biological entity detected. Lethal force authorized. Firing in 3 seconds. 6 red targeting lasers instantly painted the matriarch's chest. The giant alien roared, her maternal instincts flaring instantly. She moved to throw her massive body over her hyperactive, gummy-filled cubs, preparing to take the plasma fire to save her young. But she didn't have to. Before the turrets could fire, Jake moved. The soft, unarmored, supposedly fragile human stepped directly into the line of fire, physically placing his body between the heavy plasma cannons and the apex predators. He looked up at the automated guns, his face twisting from mild annoyance to pure, unfiltered human rage. The heavy plasma turrets glowed, white-hot, their automated servos locking onto the galaxy's deadliest predator. But to get to her, they had to go through a minimum-wage human janitor first. If you want more incredible stories of humans bending the entire galaxy to their will using nothing but pure spite and junk food, hit that subscribe button right now before the lasers fire. The 6 targeting lasers converged directly onto the center of Jake's chest. Red dots danced across the faded logo of his work shirt. Behind him, the matriarch let out a panicked, deafening shriek. She lunged forward, her massive jaws opening out a bite, but to grab the human by his collar and pull him to safety. Her highly evolved brain understood human biology perfectly. Without kinetic shielding or bioarmor, the plasma bolts would instantly turn this squishy, unarmored biped into falling ash. She had just found her Pax Alpha. She was not going to watch him die. Firing, the synthetic voice of the defense grid droned, entirely devoid of mercy. Jake didn't flinch. He didn't cower, and he certainly didn't run. Instead, his eyes narrowed. He reached down and grabbed the thick, synthetic handle of his mop. On the command deck, Commander Zarin and the revived tactical officer watched in absolute, paralyzed horror. To the alien crew, it looked like madness. It looked like suicide. A rudimentary, cleaning stick against military-grade plasma cannons? It was the final desperate act of a doomed species. But Zarin didn't fully understand humans. He didn't understand that they evolved on a high-gravity, death world, relying on blunt force-thrown projectiles and sheer, unfiltered audacity to survive. He also didn't know that Technician Third Class Jake had played minor league baseball back in Ohio. With a fluid, kinetic motion that completely shattered the alien's understanding of mammalian biomechanics, Jake planted his feet, twisted his hips, and swung the heavy, chemically soaked mop handle upward in a flawless, devastating arc. He didn't aim for the heavily armored turrets. He aimed for the exposed ceiling panel where they had deployed from. The heavy, wet mop head smashed directly into the station's high-voltage deployment relay. Thick, conductive industrial floor cleaner instantly splashed across the exposed circuitry. Sparks erupted in a blinding flash of blue and white lightning. The turrets fired, but the massive short circuit jerked their automated servos violently to the left. Searing, superheated plasma bolts scorched the corridor walls, melting the reinforced steel into molten slag, missing Jake and the Kaelen family by mere inches. Before the turrets could realign for a second volley, the main breaker blew. The gun sparked, seized violently, and powered down with a pathetic whining fizzle. Droplets of melted metal rained down, hissing against the floor. Total Suffocating silence fell over Corridor 7B. On the command deck, a pin drop could be heard. A human had just out-reflexed an advanced AI targeting matrix using a wet rag on a stick. The matriarch stared at the smoking, destroyed ceiling panel. Then, she slowly lowered her gaze to Jake. Her respect before was absolute because he had provided nourishment. Now, it bordered on religious reverence. This tiny, squishy creature had fed her young the sweet nectar of the gods, and then single-handedly defeated a lethal plasma matrix with a blunt instrument to protect them. She threw her massive head back and let out a triumphant glass-shattering roar, declaring to the entire station that this territory now belonged to her pack. And her pack was led by a guy making 15 galactic credits an hour. Commander Zarn slumped back into his command chair, rubbing his scaly temples. "Sir," the tactical officer whispered, his feathers completely flattened. Do we send a team to arrest him for destroying station property?" Zarn let out a dry, hysterical laugh. "Arrest him? Are you insane? He is now the legally recognized alpha of a Kaelen Matriarch. If you even look at his timesheet wrong, she will rip Aegis Prime out of orbit." Down in the corridor, Jake tossed his smoking mop aside with a heavy, annoyed sigh. The 3 gummy-filled cubs were already climbing his legs, using his denim jeans as a scratching post. The matriarch lovingly nudged his shoulder with a bio-armored snout the size of a small spacecraft, nearly sending him sprawling into the wall. All right, take it easy," Jake grumbled, reaching into his hoodie pocket for another fruit snack to pacify the giant beast. He looked up at the shattered security camera, staring directly into the cracked lens. Zarn felt a chill run straight down his spine. "Hey, Commander?" Jake's exasperated voice echoed over the bridge comms. "I'm taking my lunch break early, and I'm going to need a requisition form for a new mop. Oh, and send someone down to the Earth sector to get a whole crate of fruit snacks. The strawberry ones. Trust me." Zarn didn't hesitate for a single microsecond. He smashed the intercom button. "Approved, Technician Jake." Approved immediately. As Zarn began drafting the most absurd diplomatic incident report in galactic history, he realized a terrifying truth. Humanity hadn't conquered the stars with dreadnoughts or superweapons. They were conquering it with pure audacity, a complete lack of self-preservation, and a frankly alarming amount of high-fructose corn syrup.